Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the webinar. My name is Siddharth, or just Sid, if that's easier, and I'm from the IT Security Solutions team at Manage Engine, and I will be your presenter for today's webinar. On behalf of the entire team at Manage Engine involved with planning today's webinar, I just want to extend a warm welcome to all of you, and thank you all for taking time off from your busy schedules for joining us today. But before we get started, I just wanted to make sure that you can hear me loud and clear, and I hope you can view my shared screen, right? So you should be able to see a screen that says webinar agenda. In case you're experiencing difficulties, do reach out to us on the chat option on the GoToWebinar panel, and we have our tech support team right here to resolve any issues that you may face. We have our support team to answer your questions about the webinar itself over this next 45 to 50 minutes. So make use of the chat option and interact with us. Let us know in case you have any issues as well. So just want to get another housekeeping thing out of the way. We will be sending you the recording of today's webinar. We will be sending you the slide deck along with the actual recording. So you should be getting that in a day or two, right? So we already had one person asking us if we will be getting the recording. So yep, you will be getting that as well. I also want to just let you know again and reiterate that one of the main objectives of doing today's webinar is so that we can directly interact with our attendees, and we want to engage in conversations with you on the live chat. So we will be covering a whole bunch of ideas in today's webinar, but what I'd really like is if you guys can talk to us on the live chat. Tell us what you think about the things that are being discussed. Tell us what kinds of solutions you are using to solve the problems that are going to be discussed, and also let us know if you have any better way of doing the same thing, because this is honestly a collaborative platform where Manage Engine as a vendor can talk to you guys and talk to our customers to understand your problems, talk about the solutions that we can provide, and really work together in overcoming these challenges, right? So here's the agenda for today's webinar. We're going to be looking at ransomware today. We're going to be looking at something that all of us are concerned about. So we'll start off with talking a little bit about the history and evolution of ransomware. And this is very important because it's important to understand the attack pattern and exactly what ransomware does so that we can prepare for defense, right? We're also going to be looking at some best practices to prevent ransomware. This would be to reduce the chances rather of being hit by an attack. We'll then look at how you can achieve real-time incident detection and response by setting up security monitoring in your environment. And we'll also look at how you can achieve this using Data Security Plus, which is Manage Engine's real-time data discovery, data protection tool that was recently launched, right? So this is the agenda for the webinar. In case you have any questions, do keep them coming on the live chat and we try to answer them. We're just resolving a couple of issues on the chat. So within another 30 seconds, we should get started with the actual presentation. Right, so hopefully any issues that you had with the WebEx console has been resolved. So let's get started with looking at the material that we have today. So this is what we don't want, right? So this is actually a screenshot of what a ransomware message would look like. And this is, of course, WannaCry, which was a huge problem last year, especially during the months of April and May. And what we're going to be looking at is how we can defeat this thing that you see on the screen, because ransomware is almost Hollywood-esque, in its in the way it carries out an attack. It does something bad and then it puts out a ransom message, and it literally is asking you to pay money in order to let your data, that is its hostage, free. So let's start off by looking at a little bit about the history of ransomware. And it all started in around 1989, which is about 30 years ago. And back then, ransomware was a bit of a failure, right? So no one really was concerned about ransomware back then, because it wasn't even a thing to be concerned about, because ransomware was at a very primitive stage in 1989, and it had very basic encryption techniques. And one of the most important things to understand, and if some of you have been in IT for say 15 or 20 years, you would know that networks weren't connected back then the way they are connected today, right? So ransomware cannot really propagate across the network and spread to different machines the way it can today. It couldn't do that back then, right? So networks were much smaller, much confined to smaller corporate networks and LANs and that sort of thing. And it wasn't something that could reach thousands or hundreds of thousands of machines worldwide and spread through big networks the way it does today. However, things started to change in the 2000s with the dot-com bubble, and ransomware itself started having more stronger encryption techniques. And because of the dot-com bubble, it was able to spread through larger networks. And just a moment, I'm sorry about that. I think some people are still having issues with viewing the presentation. It still shows, from my end, it says that I'm on air and my screen is being shared. So maybe if anyone is still experiencing difficulties, you could try just closing the machine and closing the window and restarting again, right? Because most of our attendees a couple of people have said that they're not able to view the shared screen. So if you could just try to maybe close the webinar and join again, it should be fine. Because from my end, it says that I'm on air and my screen is being shared, right? So sorry about that. So as I was saying, so in the 2000s, because of the dot-com bubble, ransomware was able to spread across the globe, target more machines. And also ransomware's encryption techniques became more stronger, right? So if earlier the encryption techniques were pretty weak, in the sense that if a machine got encrypted, it could easily be decrypted, right? So that started to change in the 2000s. And then a big thing happened in the 2010, which was Bitcoin, right? Because once Bitcoin came out, it became easier for the malicious actors who were trying to carry out the attack anonymously, right? Because ransomware was something that was being tracked by the cyber police, if you will. And because of Bitcoin, people who carried out such attacks couldn't be tracked. So with the 2000s, you had the dot-com bubble and ransomware being able to reach out to more machines worldwide. You had stronger encryption techniques that made it more difficult to decrypt the files. And then with Bitcoin, it made it easier for hackers to carry out an attack and not get caught, right? And because of that, last year and even this year, the trend has continued. We've had so many different kinds of ransomware strains and variants of these strains. You had WannaCry, Petya, Locky, Zepto, whole bunch of these things. And all of these, I've just picked out a few popular ones. So you might have well heard of these. And what all of this has done is that it has resulted in a rise of RAAS, right? Ransomware as a service. So just like you have SaaS or software as a service, where companies provide software as a service, you have ransomware as a service being provided by the bad guys for other bad guys who want to carry out attacks, right? So just think about this. There are actually ransomware starter kits available online that people can purchase and then deploy an attack, right? So it's basically like a cyber criminal saying, I want to carry out a ransomware attack. I don't know the know-hows on how to go about this, but oh wait, I can just buy a ransomware starter kit, get that, and then launch an attack, right? So it's become very easy for people to carry out ransomware attacks. It's easy now for them to target machines across the globe because we are also connected through the internet. The ransomware encryption techniques have become so strong that it's virtually impossible to decrypt some of these ransomware strains. Bitcoin has made it impossible to track the bad guys carrying out the attacks, and bad guys who don't even have knowledge about ransomware or developing their own ransomware can buy ransomware as a service and easily launch an attack, right? So because of all of this, ransomware defense has become one of the main concerns for CIOs across the world, right? So just like they put a lot of emphasis on things like compliance and data security and things like that, ransomware itself has become a domain in IT security, right? Protection, ransomware protection itself has become an industry in itself. And the number, and you can see on the last point of the slide, the number of potential victims, the high chance of ransom payout, low risk of getting caught, and the low effort to launch an attack has made it ideal for attackers. Ransomware is by far one of the most popular attacks in today's cybersecurity space, right? Because we care about data. That's the number one goal in IT security. And because of that, they know that in case they get your data, there's a good chance you're going to pay the ransom in order to get your data back, because data is what we all care about, right? And we'll do anything to keep our data safe. So this is the scenario. This is where we are. This is what is happening out there. And if you think that, oh, I've not got encrypted so far, it's probably, and you don't have any solutions in place to stop ransomware, it's probably just that you've gotten lucky so far. Because recently I've noticed, and for the last couple of years, we usually do this thing during events where we ask the attendees of our event if they've ever been attacked by ransomware, and the number of hands going up more recently has been a lot higher, right? So if maybe a couple of years ago, maybe a couple of people might raise their hands in the audience, but just a couple of months back when I was doing a presentation in California, and I asked how many of you have been attacked by ransomware, 8 hands went up, and it was just an audience of around 35 to 40 people, right? So it's become a much more bigger problem than some of us even can comprehend. And as a result of that, we have to start taking steps to stop the attack, stop these kinds of attacks. So let's start off by understanding the attack pattern, right? So let's look at how ransomware goes about doing its thing. It starts off, like most cyber attacks, it starts off with phishing, right? I think about 90% of today's cyber attacks happen because of phishing. This could either be someone going to a malicious domain without realizing it, or it could be the classic example of an employee downloading an email attachment, right? Because this is, again, important to think about. Even though we all know that phishing exists, it's important to think about it in the context of ransomware, because we know that ransomware today has the ability to spread across a network. Now, what this means is that even if one employee in your organization gets infected, that infection can potentially spread across to other machines in your network as well, right? So think about this, that you have an organization of 500 employees, 499 of your employees are smart and know the dangers of these different threats like phishing, but one employee is not aware of this. And because of that, there's a potential chance that other employees who were doing the right thing and being cautious about downloading attachments, they can still get infected because one employee wasn't aware of the threats, right? So, and because the strains have become so clever today, and I think it was in June last year, a strain of Petya started to proliferate across the globe, and Petya could actually figure out the list of IP addresses in your network that it can spread to, and it uses different kinds of techniques to obtain credentials for those machines, and it's able to spread across different machines without directly first infecting them. right? And that is absolutely horrifying. And that's the biggest problem with ransomware today, that it can spread really fast across your network and potentially infect all your files and folders and shares. And and this is why phishing is how it usually starts, because it might be difficult for attackers to directly compromise one of your domain controllers or file servers, but it is not very hard for them to compromise one of your users workstations, right? Because users are going to be all over the place on the internet, and they might not be aware of what sites they're accessing and what kinds of things they're downloading, and in the background a lot of processes might be getting initiated. Some of these could be malicious, some of these could be ransomware, and ransomware can then potentially spread through your network, right? So what happens is, once I just wanted to use this slide to reiterate the importance of educating your employees, and we'll get to that in a moment. But the reason I wanted to mainly show this slide is to depict this basic pattern of an attack, so that you can start to think of different things you can do at each stage of the attack in order to tighten your security, right? Because it starts off with phishing. So think about what you can do to reduce the chance of of one of your employees falling prey to a phishing attack. You know that it's going to encrypt data. Ransomware, it's going to encrypt data. So think about what kind of monitoring you can implement to detect the encryption of data. It's going to demand a ransom. So in case you, at this stage of the attack, in case it's happened and it's demanding a ransom, think about what you would do. And then it's going to spread across your network to other machines. So think about what you can do in this context. If it's reached the stage where it's starting to spread across your network, think about what you would do to contain the attack at that stage, right? So these are the 4 stages of ransomware attack. It starts off with phishing. You're going to have the actual data encryption. It's going to demand a ransom and then spread across your network. So at each of these stages, you want to have measures in place to try to stop the attack, to first detect the attack and then try to stop it. And we're going to cover each of these things. But I don't want to directly just tell you what we think is the right solution, because you may well have a solution in place, or you may well have different technology in place to help you track attacks at each of these stages. So think about what you would do at each of these stages. What can you do to eliminate phishing? What can you do to detect the encryption instantly? Think about what you would do in case it's reached the stage where there is a ransom note on the screen. Think about what you would do when it starts to spread across your network. Because just like any other attack chain, it's possible to kill the attack at different points, right? So if you have technology and monitoring and measures in place at each of these stages, you may well be able to detect and stop the attack at an early stage, right? So let's start at looking at how we can actually approach the problem practically, right? So the first step that we recommend is to reduce the chance of being hit by an attack, right? So first step for any cyber attack, including ransomware, reduce the chance of being hit by an attack. This is ideal. This is ideal if we can just say, I do a bunch of things and attacks won't even reach my workstations and file servers, right? So here's where it's important to look at things like fixing vulnerabilities and following other best practices. We'll look at this in the next slide, right? So, but this is the first thing you want to do. You want to reduce the chance of being hit by an attack in the first place. And in an ideal world, this would be enough, right? You do a bunch of checklists and you're good to go, right? So think of it as a situation where it's just like saying, if you study hard for an exam, you'd probably do well in it, right? But there's no guarantee. But there's a good chance that if you study everything that's been covered in class, you go and write the exam, there's a good chance you'll do well, right? So that's the same. It's analogous to fixing vulnerabilities, following best practices, and doing tried and tested security practices in order to eliminate the chances of being hit by an attack in the first place. Now, just like I said, there's no guarantee that this will help you 100% of the times. That is why you need to focus on incident detection and response, right? Because doing the first thing of fixing vulnerabilities and things like that does go a long way in reducing the chance of being hit by an attack. But at the end of the day, there's still a good chance that despite best measures, you may still have a ransomware infection. Here is where you have to start to focus on incident detection and response mechanisms, right? So you want to be in a position that in case on any of your resources in your network, something bad starts to happen, that is in this case, a ransomware infection takes place, you want to be in a position to immediately detect that, right? So it's like saying on workstation XYZ, a ransomware process has been initiated. If that happens, your security team should have alerting and tracking in place so that they can immediately detect that, right? So because if the sooner you detect, the sooner you can respond. So here is where you want to leverage security monitoring technology, and there's a whole bunch of other technology out there in the industry. Just like how we were just like I was talking about earlier, a couple of slides ago, ransomware defense, detection, and response has become an industry by itself within IT security, right? So there's a lot of technology out there that can help you monitor your different workstations and file servers and your network and detect ransomware activity in case it gets initiated on one of your machines, right? So this is the second thing you want to focus on. That is to be able to monitor your environment and detect potential infections that may happen in any of your machines. And then prepare for the worst, right? You reduce the chance of being hit by an attack to eliminate a lot of attacks. You focus on incident detection and response to stop attacks that have gotten past your basic security defenses. But you also want to prepare for the worst so that in case you get infected, you're able to recover from the attack, right? So this is a threefold strategy. And it's so important to have this threefold strategy for advanced attacks like ransomware, because really this is the only way you can for sure say that your environment is protected from ransomware. You have best practices in place, you have monitoring and incident detection and response in place, and you also prepare for the worst so that in case 1 and 2 fail, you're still in a position to recover and keep your data secure. So this is how we recommend approaching the problem. Threefold: reduce the chances of being hit by an attack, focus on incident detection, and also prepare for the worst. If you have all of these three things in place, I think you're in a good position to protect your data and protect your environment from ransomware and really any other cyber attack, right? If you're following this approach of adding security policies and adding security measures for each of these three different things, that really puts you in a really good position to detect and mitigate attacks. So let's look at the first thing that we discussed: best practices. And admins like you guys would probably love these because most of these are free, right? And sometimes I think that in security, even some of the best security technology isn't even technology and it's free, right? So and that's why I have user education on top of my list. In fact, just last month I was at a security summit in Jordan, and people were discussing the different areas and pressing issues in IT security today, right? So it was a conference for CIOs and a lot of C-level people from different security vendors. And we were talking about what were the biggest challenges being faced in IT security today. And we all sort of realized that there is great technology out there. There is cutting edge antivirus, cutting edge SIM, cutting edge threat intelligence, and all of that. But at the end of the day, the one thing that technology cannot give you is user education, right? Because you might have the best technology in place, but like I said, all it takes is one user, just one user. It could be a guy from marketing who doesn't have a clue about what's happening in cybersecurity, and it could well be that guy who downloads an attachment thinking it to be from a legitimate source, but it turns out to be malicious, and he gets infected, and then the same infection spreads across your network. Where does your cutting edge technology help you in that case, right? Instead, if all of your users were educated, the attack stops even before it can get launched, right? It gets stopped at the phishing stage itself. So here is where we recommend driving programs in your organization to stress upon the importance of cybersecurity, stress upon the dangers of surfing the internet. And these kinds of things can be as simple as shooting out regular emails to your employees, holding short presentations and seminars. It might almost sound unrealistic or difficult to implement, but it's totally worth taking the time and effort to ensure that every employee in your organization is aware of risks like ransomware and is careful while downloading attachments and visiting different websites and things like that, right? So this is basic. We all know that user education is important, and yet we have so many employees probably in our organization who aren't aware of these risks. And user education really is the number one thing that you want to focus on when it comes to cybersecurity today. So take time stressing upon this, even though we all know about the importance, but this is something that we often overlook. And putting some time and effort into user education can really go a long way in helping you protect your environment from ransomware, right? And then the next thing, patching vulnerabilities. Again, we all know that it's important. We all know that it's crucial, and yet we don't do it, right? A patch is available, new updates are available, and this is probably something that I must say that a lot of us are guilty of, even for our personal computers, right? What is the first thing that we do when we get a pop-up that says a new software update is available? Our instinct is to try and close that pop-up, right? So while it might be okay to a certain extent if it's just our personal PC in our home, it's not okay when it comes to an IT environment and a critical patch has been released by Microsoft, right? So ensure that you have a streamlined mechanism in place for patching. Again, I don't need to tell you guys this because you probably know this even better than me, but I want to stress upon these best practices because it makes so much sense in taking time and effort to get these things in place, because then you have a hassle-free, worry-free year ahead of you, right? If you can take time to ensure that your users are educated, patches are deployed on time, all your systems are running the latest software that is devoid of vulnerabilities. You want to have some basic email filtering in place, enforcing least privilege and other tried and tested practice in IT security, right? Because organizations often provide more access rights to their employees than is needed. And why do we do that? Because it's convenient, right? Because we hand out privileges so that things don't have to slow down when users require extra permissions during the course of their work. But the downside of doing this is that there is an automatic increase to the potential attack surface for any ransomware attack. And you have a lot of risky users and machines if you're just handing out privileges for fun, right? So instead, here again, it makes a lot of sense to use more robust access management to restrict accesses and to reduce the number of accesses and privilege points through which malware can enter and spread through your organization, right? So again, basic enforcing least privilege is something that we've all learned about. Make sure you're practicing it. And then you have, of course, a few more things like blocking known malicious IP addresses, other kinds of basic firewall policies that you can implement so that again, these are all things to eliminate the chances of being hit by an attack. And the more of these things that you do, and the more, especially the first two, and the more of these things that you do, the lesser the chance of you being hit by an attack, right? So the last point on the slide says, do not pay the hackers, right? And you might be thinking, hey, that's quite strange. What do you mean do not pay the hackers? And why is that a best practice, right? Because a lot of security professionals strongly recommend not paying the hackers because, first of all, there is no guarantee that they're going to decrypt data, right? Because there is no, they could well just take your Bitcoin and not decrypt the data, right? So there's no proof that paying the hackers works 100% of the time. Not only that, but if you're paying the hackers, you're encouraging them to carry out more attacks. Because a lot of case studies have shown that people who have been infected by ransomware and paid the ransom have eventually got encrypted again, right? Because hackers know that, oh, okay, you're going to be paying me $300 if I encrypt your data. Let me do it again, right? So there's no guarantee, number one, of paying the hackers. And there's also, it doesn't make sense to pay them because if you pay them, you're only encouraging them to carry out more attacks because they know that they're successful. And you're also feeding the industry of ransomware as a service. Now, I'm saying do not pay the hackers, but I'm saying data is important. And one of you just so rightly pointed out on the live chat that we missed the best practice, which is backing up your data, right? Because the only way that you can go ahead and you get encrypted, and the only way you can tell the hackers that you're not going to pay them is if you have a backup, right? So that's what my next slide is. The best practice. Back up your data. It's as simple as that, right? Because if you do, if 1 and 2 fail in our security defenses, that is reducing the chance of being hit by an attack and detecting the attack, if these two things fail, the only sure shot way of recovering from ransomware is through backups. Nothing else can help you, right? You could have a $1 million monitoring tool in place. It's not going to help you get your data back. Regular backups, regular incremental scheduled backups, that is going to help you. And it's not going to cost you $1 million either, right? So this is something that you want to do. And I really appreciate a couple of you actually mentioned this in the previous slide, saying you missed backup. Because this is the only sure shot way. And even as a vendor at ManageEngine that provides ransomware detection solutions, I can tell you that that is not a guaranteed way of beating ransomware. No security solution is a guaranteed way of beating ransomware. Whereas backup is a 100% sure shot way of recovering from an attack. You get infected by ransomware, your manager asks you what you're going to do about it. Are you going to pay the hackers? And you have your backup in place. You're not only going to keep your manager happy, but you're also going to keep your data safe and secure, right? You can just quarantine the machine, pull it off the network, not pay the hacker, recover your data, and have the machine up and running again in a few hours, right? So it's as simple as that. Make sure you're taking backup of your sensitive data on your file servers and databases. Right. So we looked at a lot of best practices, and I cannot reiterate how important some of those are, especially the standout ones for me are user education, backup, and patching vulnerabilities, right? These are my top 3 best practices that you want to have in place in order to eliminate most possible ransomware infections, right? So most of your attacks are going to be stopped by just doing those 3. Now, when it comes to some of these attacks that can slip through your best practices and your security defenses, it's very important to have incident detection and response in place, right? So you want to be able to track file activity and data activity so that you can detect suspicious activity and detect potential ransomware infections at an early stage, right? Because there's a very scary trend in how some ransomware files get installed on machines, because they get installed in the background without the user's knowledge. So it's not that the user is instantly going to see the ransom message on his screen and know that he's been encrypted. There's a good chance that ransomware is doing its thing in the background without the user realizing. And in this and in some of these cases, it's just enough that a user visits a compromised website, and a lot of these processes get downloaded and initiated in the background without the user's knowledge. And the only time they're going to realize that they are encrypted is when they go and click on one of their files, right? So you can't wait for that long, because what if the user accesses a file 2 or 3 hours after he gets infected? By that time, that the ransomware could have potentially spread across your network to other machines as well. So it becomes very important to instantly detect ransomware processes and encryptions at the early stage. So here's where you want to have security monitoring in place. And we're going to be able to do that. Using a manage engine tool called Data Security Plus. Some of you might know of a tool called File Audit Plus from Manage Engine, and we revamped the tool, added more features, and changed it to Data Security Plus a couple of months ago. So I'm going to be showing you how we can set up this kind of monitoring and alerting using Data Security Plus. But before that, we just have a look at how the attack eventually can be defeated, right, using real-time monitoring. So while we are doing this real-time monitoring, we are essentially going to be tracking different kinds of events in our environment in real time so that we can flag suspicious events and detect ransomware activity, right? So your environment is going to be smart enough with this technology to be able to track different kinds of events pertaining to your data in real time. It's going to be able to flag potential suspicious activity, right? So for example, if several files are being accessed within a few seconds, right, and it detects that as anomalous, it detects that as suspicious, and it's going to flag that as potential ransomware activity. And eventually, in a few more seconds, when it confirms that those file encryptions were indeed malicious, it's going to take action to shut down the system, right? So it's going to immediately shut down the system so that the attack ends right there. It's also going to send you an alert notification so that you immediately know that a system has been shut down due to ransomware. And then you can go ahead, quarantine the machine, take it off the network, recover the data, which is where, again, backup is important. Even if you're relying on incident detection and response, backup is still important to recover from the attack, right? So this is what it would entail in case you get infected by ransomware and you had incident detection and response mechanisms in place. You would essentially be getting an alert notification saying that a file server was infected with ransomware and the system has been shut down, so that you can then quickly go take corrective measures, quarantine the machine, and recover data, right? So now let's look at what we can do from using Manage Engine Data Security Plus, right? So we're going to be able to automate this threat response that we saw in terms of being able to detect the attack and automatically shut down the machine, which is the automatic response, right? So Data Security Plus is going to be able to do that for you, right? So you can, with the tool, you can essentially set up monitoring and alerting for suspicious file activity, right? Such as accesses and modifications and encryptions. And you're going to be able to set up this tracking and also automate threat response, right? So that you're able to achieve two things. You're not only going to be able to achieve detection, but you're also going to be able to achieve automated response. So Data Security Plus can detect suspicious file activity, confirm that it's ransomware, and shut down the infected file server in real time, right? And while it's doing that, it's also shooting you an email and SMS saying that a file server was infected with ransomware and that Data Security Plus has taken automatic response in shutting down the machine, right? So you have two important alerts that you can set up using Data Security Plus for ransomware. The first is to set up monitoring and alerting for these kinds of suspicious accesses and modifications, right? So say 100 file modifications occurring within a few seconds. You can set up that alert using Data Security Plus. You can also track known ransomware encryption formats, because there are a whole bunch of encryption formats which are known to be malicious. So with Data Security Plus, it gives you pre-built tracking of these known encryption formats. So I'm going to illustrate this by jumping into the product, and you guys can also do this using our fully functional online demo. And the reason why I'm going to literally navigate to the website and demo and show you is so that you can also do the same thing as I'm doing it, right? So just look up Data Security Plus, right? So if you just access Data Security Plus's website, you can use the fully functional, I wouldn't say fully functional, but nearly fully functional online demo of the product, right? So this is the website. So you can access manageengine.com/data-security, right? So you can get more details about the tool in terms of what it can do. And especially if some of you are were using File Audit Plus or were familiar with that tool, what we've done in Data Security Plus is basically extend the scope of File Audit Plus, right? Because File Audit Plus was essentially a file server auditing tool, and we decided to expand the scope of the product by bringing in more advanced features such as data discovery and things like that, right? So in terms of being able to discover different kinds of data in your environment, some of you might be complying with different regulations that expect you to identify where a particular piece of data is stored and then implement security policies on that. So we brought in those kinds of features to the tool, and that's why we renamed the product to Data Security Plus, right? So if you go to the website, you can then just go to the online demo. And what you can do is here, if you would like to look at a personalized demo of the product with one of our pre-sales consultants, you can go ahead and fill up this form. You can see this demo request form that's loading here. You can go ahead and just drop in your email, telephone number, a convenient date for the demo, and our pre-sales team will give you a half an hour web demo over call and sort of brief you on the different capabilities of the product, right? But for now, you can just use the link, right, that you see here, the demo.datasecurityplus.com, and this will take you to the online demo of the product. And you can just log in as an administrator, right? There's nothing else to do here. You don't have to go and leave your email ID or anything of that sort, because I know people are very apprehensive about trying online demos because they think there's a whole bunch of formalities to be done before accessing it, right? So go ahead. I think a lot of people are also logging into the demo, so it might be a little bit slower than it usually is, but it should still get the work done for you. So it gives you a good feel really of the product, and sort of gives you a hands-on experience, not as good as installing it in your environment, but still a pretty decent experience in terms of navigating through different sections of the product, looking at how data gets populated, looking at how you can set up these alerts, and really exploring the capabilities of the tool, right? So now that it's loaded, I'm going to go jump to the alerts tab, so you guys can do that as well. You can see on the top, go to the alerts tab and click on new alert profile, right? So this should have taken you to the new alert profile for screen. And here is where you can configure alerting for different things that you might want to do for compliance and security. But we're going to be looking at how we can set up alerts for ransomware, right? And we discussed two different alerts. One is the alert for several modifications occurring within a short period of time, which is basically less than a minute. And we're also going to be looking at setting up alerts for known encryption formats. So you have two different detection mechanisms in place. One that is tracking file encryption formats, and one that is more generic and is tracking activity, several modifications within a short period of time that could be malicious, right? So one is a very specific alert, which is tracking specific known encryption formats, and the other is more generic, but it sort of tracks, but it's able to track suspicious activity in your environment, right? So you can just see how you can configure alerts. I'm going to skip the basic things of naming the alert profile and giving a description. You can set a severity, right? Attention, trouble, or critical. And here is where you can choose what action you want to monitor, right? So you have a whole bunch of different actions that can be tracked, things like creations, modifications, deletions, moves, renames, overrides, permission changes, a whole bunch of things that can be tracked, SACL changes, so very granular over there, extension changes. All of these things can be tracked. So if you go for a more generic alert and look at just modifications that covers any sort of modification, or you could select all, you can basically tweak these alerts, right? I'm not going to go over this extensively, but you can sort of see what kinds of events that you can choose to be tracked. So say I choose modifications. What I can then do is go set a threshold, right? So you can see this checkbox that says threshold limit. I can choose 100 events occurring within 1 minute, and I can choose the source. Could it be, do you want 100 events across any source, right? Because that could be a problem. You might, if you have a large environment, you may well have 100 events happening across all your sources within 1 minute. So you can instead choose the process or the user. And this is very crucial, right? This granular tracking, because you're able to choose and say that if on one particular user's machine or one particular process, if that is doing these 100 modifications within 1 minute, that is when you get the alert, right? So you're able to go very specific in configuration, right? You don't want to just choose any source, because if you have a large environment, you might just end up getting a whole bunch of false positives. But if you can be very specific in choosing same user or same process, right? So you can also go ahead, choose the exact objects that you want to monitor, which are the files and folders, which are the that you want to track. So that's again something that you can configure in the alerting. Again, the username, the file type. So this is again pretty interesting, because what you get to do is add different kinds of file types. And you can see that there are executables, web files, system files, a whole bunch of things that you can track. And in context of ransomware, you can see that we have pre-built file extensions built into the product, so that if any of these known ransomware encryptions files get created in any of your machines, you can still detect that and respond to the attack, right? So this would be the second alert, right? The first alert was to set up alerting for several modifications occurring within less than a minute. And the other alert that you can set up is alerts for any known ransomware encrypted file format getting created in your machines, right? So that's another alert that you can set up. So go about, I encourage you to just try doing this on the online setup, so that you get a feel of the UI and the usability of the product, so that you can also look at what kinds of alerts you want to set up in your environment. So this is the part where the product can detect the attack with these alerts. The second part, and this is the cool part, you can actually choose an action to be executed when the alert gets triggered, right? So you've set up alerts for ransomware detection, and you can also attach an action to the alert, so that not only is the product detecting that activity in real time, but it's also responding to the threat in real time by shutting down the machine in the case of ransomware, right? So it's able to do this real-time tracking of known ransomware encryption formats or several modifications happening by the same process within a short period of time. It's detecting that, and then you can attach a script to shut down the machine, right? And the script is again available pre-built in the product, so you can just choose the bat file from the product installation. And what it's going to do is it's going to detect the attack in real time and shut down the machine in real time. At the same time, sending you an email notification, which you can configure right here, saying that a file server ransomware was detected on a file server, and Data Security Plus has done the right thing by shutting down the machine and informing you, right? So I encourage you to look more at the demo setup, so that you can get a feel of what it entails to configure this kind of monitoring and alerting using Data Security Plus. And what you can do over and above this is reach out to us via email, or reach out to us via the demo request form that I showed you, in case you want to see a live demo in your environment as well, right? So, but don't worry, we're not going to encrypt your files, of course. But what I mean is that our pre-sales consultants will walk you through the product, install it in your environment, and walk you through the different basic configurations so that you can start monitoring ransomware in your environment, right? So this brings me to the end of my presentation. My apologies in case I used the word File Audit Plus instead of Data Security Plus, because File Audit Plus is a tool that's been with Managed Engine for so many years. And now that we recently changed the product's name to Data Security Plus, some of us inside still, out of sheer habit, keep saying File Audit Plus, right? But the scope of the product has been extended so much that it probably makes sense for us to be more conscious in terms of what we're calling the product. Right, so on that note, you can see that I still have the support at File Audit Plus mentioned in the final slide, because we've used this webinar before for File Audit Plus. But you can still reach out to this email ID because it still works. We still have File Audit Plus customers. So I just want to finish the webinar by saying that thank you so much for your engagement on the live chat. We've been responding to some of your questions and interacting with you on the live chat throughout the webinar. Keep the questions coming, because we're still available for another 10 or 15 minutes to answer your questions. In case you have any product queries, reach out to us on the live chat, or reach out or visit our website and reach out to us via the demo request form. Other than that, thank you so much for joining us today and interacting with us on the live chat. Once again, I want to thank everyone from our Managed Engine team involved with hosting today's webinar. I hope you found it useful. So do take a moment at the end of the webinar to leave your feedback and let us know what you liked or didn't like about the session, and what suggestions you have for future webinar topics as well, right? But I hope it served the purpose of providing information about ransomware, about Managed Engine's solutions for ransomware, and also to engage in a discussion amongst all of us about some of the issues and approaches to solving the problems, of ransomware, right? So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great day ahead.